The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged mountain terrain as Captain Marcus Rodriguez checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. His radio crackled with static, but no clear communication came through from headquarters. The 163 Rangers under his command were scattered across the valley below, conducting what was supposed to be a routine training exercise in the remote wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. Maria Santos adjusted her scope and peered through the dense forest canopy from her elevated position on the ridge. As the only female sniper in the elite mountain rescue unit, she had volunteered for this solo reconnaissance mission to monitor the training exercise from above. Her job was simple: observe and report. Nothing more, nothing less. The autumn air was crisp against her face as she settled into her position, unaware that this day would change everything. Below in the valley, Sergeant James Thompson led his squad through a narrow canyon, following the predetermined route marked on their GPS devices. The 24-year-old from Texas had been looking forward to this exercise for weeks. It was his first major training operation since joining the Mountain Rangers 6 months ago. His excitement was shared by many of the newer recruits who saw this as an opportunity to prove themselves alongside the veterans. The exercise had begun at dawn with 163 Rangers divided into smaller units, each assigned specific objectives across the mountainous terrain. Some were practicing search and rescue techniques, others were working on survival skills, and a few units like Thompson's were focused on navigation and terrain assessment. The weather forecast had been perfect, and morale was high among the troops. Maria noticed the first signs of trouble around mid-morning. Through her scope, she observed unusual cloud formations building rapidly on the horizon. Her years of experience in mountain environments had taught her to read weather patterns, and what she saw made her stomach tighten with concern. The clouds were moving faster than predicted, and they were darker than anything the Weather Service had forecasted. Captain Rodriguez felt the first drops of rain as he coordinated with his unit leaders via radio. The communication was becoming increasingly difficult as atmospheric interference grew stronger. What had started as a light drizzle quickly intensified into a steady downpour. Within 30 minutes, the rain had become torrential, turning the mountain streams into raging torrents and making the already challenging terrain treacherous. Thompson and his squad took shelter under a rocky overhang as the storm intensified. The young sergeant tried to maintain radio contact with other units, but the static was overwhelming. The GPS devices began malfunctioning due to the severe weather, and visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. What had been a clear, marked trail was now a muddy, dangerous path with loose rocks and unstable footing. From her vantage point, Maria watched with growing alarm as the weather system engulfed the entire valley. The wind picked up dramatically, bending trees and creating a roar that drowned out most other sounds. She attempted to radio headquarters to report the deteriorating conditions, but her communications were also affected by the storm. The realization that she might be the only person with a clear view of the unfolding disaster began to sink in. As the afternoon progressed, the situation became critical. The heavy rainfall triggered multiple landslides across the mountainside, blocking the main access roads and cutting off escape routes. Captain Rodriguez's worst fears were realized when he discovered that several of the predetermined rally points had been compromised by falling rocks and debris. His scattered units were now effectively trapped in various locations throughout the valley. Private Elena Vesquez, a medic with one of the search and rescue teams, found herself treating injuries as Rangers struggled with the increasingly dangerous conditions. Twisted ankles, cuts from sharp rocks, and cases of hypothermia began to mount as the cold rain soaked through their gear. The medical supplies she carried were limited, designed for minor injuries during routine training, not for a full-scale emergency involving over 160 people. Maria made the difficult decision to abandon her observation post and move to a better position where she might be able to establish communication with the outside world. As she carefully navigated the treacherous terrain in the storm, she carried with her the growing weight of responsibility. She was beginning to understand that she might be the only hope for the trapped Rangers below. The storm showed no signs of abating as evening approached. Temperature began to drop rapidly, adding the threat of hypothermia to the already dangerous situation. Captain Rodriguez gathered what remained of his command structure and tried to account for all personnel. The task was nearly impossible with communications down and units scattered across miles of mountainous terrain. Sergeant Thompson's squad had managed to find better shelter in a small cave, but they were completely cut off from the rest of the operation. The young sergeant took responsibility for keeping his team's morale up while conserving their limited supplies. He rationed their food and water, knowing that they might be stranded for much longer than anyone had anticipated. Meanwhile, families and loved ones back home remained unaware of the developing crisis. The training exercise had been scheduled to last 3 days with minimal external communication, so no one expected regular updates. The Rangers' absence from normal contact wouldn't raise alarms for at least another day, precious time that the trapped personnel might not have. Maria reached a rocky outcrop that provided some protection from the wind while giving her a strategic view of multiple areas where she had last seen Ranger units. Her military training kicked in as she began to assess the situation systematically. She counted the areas where she could see stranded groups, estimated distances, and calculated the resources that would be needed for any rescue operation. The reality of their situation became clear as night fell. The storm had effectively isolated 163 highly trained Rangers in one of the most remote and dangerous mountain regions in the country. Their communications were down, their escape routes were blocked, and weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate. Medical supplies were limited, and hypothermia was becoming a serious threat as temperatures plummeted. Captain Rodriguez made the hard decision to order his units to focus on survival rather than continuing the exercise. He instructed squad leaders to find the best available shelter, conserve supplies, and prepare for an extended stay in the mountains. The experienced officer knew that panic could be as deadly as the elements, so he worked to maintain discipline and hope among his troops even as his own concerns grew. As Maria settled into her improvised shelter for what promised to be a long, dangerous night, she reflected on her unique position. She was trained as a sniper and reconnaissance specialist, not a rescue coordinator. Yet circumstances had placed her in a role that might determine whether 163 of her fellow Rangers would survive the night. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her as heavily as the storm that raged around the mountain. The first night was brutal for everyone involved. Rangers huddled together in whatever shelter they could find, sharing body heat and trying to stay dry. Several units reported injuries over the sporadic radio communications that occasionally broke through the interference. The storm continued its relentless assault on the mountain, bringing with it the very real possibility that this routine training exercise could become a major catastrophe. Maria spent the night moving between observation points, using her night vision equipment to track the various groups and assess their conditions. She began formulating a plan, knowing that when morning came, she might be the only person in a position to coordinate any rescue efforts. Her sniper training had taught her patience and precision, qualities that would be essential in the challenges that lay ahead. As dawn approached, the storm finally began to show signs of weakening, but the damage was already extensive. Landslides had fundamentally changed the geography of the valley, and many of the familiar landmarks that the Rangers had been using for navigation were now gone. The true scope of their predicament would become clear with the morning light, and Maria knew that she would need to act quickly if there was any hope of preventing a tragedy that could cost dozens of lives. Dawn broke over the devastated mountain landscape, revealing a scene that chilled Maria to her core. Through her scope, she surveyed the aftermath of the storm and landslides that had transformed the familiar training ground into an unrecognizable maze of fallen trees, shifted boulders, and debris-filled streams. The scope of the disaster was far worse than she had imagined during the dark hours of the night. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the rocky shelter where he had spent the night with 12 of his Rangers. His face was grim as he took in the changed landscape. The main trail they had used to enter the valley was completely blocked by a massive landslide that had deposited tons of rock and earth across what had once been their primary escape route. Even with heavy equipment, it would take days to clear a path through the debris. From her elevated position, Maria began systematically cataloging the locations of the trapped groups. She counted at least 15 separate clusters of Rangers scattered throughout the valley, some in relatively stable positions while others appeared to be in immediate danger. One group was trapped on a narrow ledge where another landslide could easily sweep them into the raging river below. Another team was visible near an area where she could see fresh cracks in the rock face, suggesting that more slides were imminent. Sergeant Thompson's squad had spent a miserable night in their cave shelter, but they had remained dry and relatively warm. As morning light filtered in, Thompson ventured outside to assess their situation and attempt radio contact. What he saw made his heart sink. The path they had taken to reach this area was now completely impassable, blocked by a wall of fallen trees and loose rock that stretched for hundreds of yards. Private Elena Vesquez continued her work as a medic, but her supplies were running dangerously low. During the night, she had treated 2 cases of severe hypothermia, several injuries from falls on the slippery terrain, and 1 ranger who had been struck by falling debris. Her limited medical kit was designed for minor field injuries, not for treating dozens of people in emergency conditions. She knew that without proper medical evacuation, some of the more seriously injured rangers might not survive another night in the mountains. Maria faced a critical decision as she observed the desperate situation below. Her communication attempts had failed throughout the night, and she realized that the regular check-in with headquarters wasn't scheduled for another 18 hours. By then, it might be too late for the most vulnerable of the trapped rangers. She had to find a way to get word to the outside world, but that would mean leaving her observation post and venturing into dangerous terrain. The psychological toll of the situation was becoming evident among the trapped rangers. Many were experienced soldiers and outdoor specialists, but being cut off from communication and trapped by natural disasters was testing everyone's mental resilience. Captain Rodriguez moved between groups when possible, using his leadership skills to maintain morale and prevent panic from spreading through the ranks. One of the most precarious situations involved a group of 8 rangers led by Lieutenant Sarah Chen. They had taken shelter in what they thought was a stable area, but the morning light revealed that they were positioned directly below a fractured cliff face. Large cracks had appeared in the rock during the storm, and Maria could see through her scope that chunks of stone were already beginning to break away. Any significant vibration or further weather could trigger a massive rockfall that would certainly be fatal. Maria made her first critical decision of the day. She carefully plotted a route down from her position that would allow her to reach a small communications relay station that she remembered from previous exercises in the area. The station was located about 3 miles away across treacherous terrain, but it represented the best chance of establishing contact with the outside world. The risk was enormous. If she became injured or lost, there would be no one else in position to coordinate rescue efforts. As she prepared to leave her observation post, Maria took detailed notes about each group's location and condition. She sketched maps showing the various debris fields, unstable areas, and potential routes that rescue teams might be able to use. This information would be crucial for any rescue operation, and she knew that her unique vantage point had given her intelligence that would be impossible to gather from ground level. The journey to the communications station proved to be even more dangerous than Maria had anticipated. The storm had not only caused landslides but had also created new streams and waterfalls as the normal drainage patterns had been disrupted. She found herself having to cross several fast-moving streams where the water was ice-cold and the current was strong enough to sweep her away if she lost her footing. Back in the valley, Captain Rodriguez was conducting his own assessment of the situation. He had managed to establish brief radio contact with about half of his scattered units, but the communications were still severely hampered by atmospheric interference and the challenging terrain. What he learned from these brief contacts confirmed his worst fears. They were dealing with multiple serious injuries, dwindling supplies, and several groups in immediately life-threatening situations. Sergeant Thompson took it upon himself to explore possible escape routes from his squad's position. What he discovered was sobering. Every path they had used during the exercise was now blocked or had become extremely dangerous. The young sergeant realized that they might be trapped for days or even weeks unless outside help arrived. He returned to his squad with a plan to ration their remaining food and water while preparing for a potentially long wait. Maria reached the communications station after 4 hours of grueling travel, only to discover that the small building had been damaged by falling trees. The main antenna was down, and several pieces of equipment had been destroyed by debris. However, her technical training allowed her to assess the damage and determine that the backup radio system might still be functional if she could repair some of the connections and find a way to power it up. Working with damaged equipment in freezing conditions, Maria spent 2 hours making repairs with improvised tools and components salvaged from the wreckage. Her sniper training had taught her patience and attention to detail, skills that proved invaluable as she carefully restored power to the emergency communication system. Finally, she heard the crackling sound that indicated the radio was receiving signals. Her first successful transmission was brief but critical. Maria managed to contact a Forest Service station 40 miles away, quickly explaining the situation and providing coordinates for the trapped rangers. The station operator was initially skeptical about the scope of the emergency, but Maria's detailed knowledge of military protocols and her precise location data convinced him that this was a genuine crisis requiring immediate response. The Forest Service operator promised to relay the emergency to appropriate authorities and confirmed that search and rescue teams would be dispatched as soon as possible. However, he also warned Maria that weather conditions were preventing helicopter operations, and ground-based rescue teams would face the same blocked roads and dangerous terrain that had trapped the rangers in the first place. Realizing that outside rescue might be hours or even days away, Maria made her second critical decision. She would return to the valley and use her unique skills and position to begin coordinating survival efforts among the trapped groups. Her sniper training included extensive experience with reconnaissance and target coordination, skills that could be adapted to help organize the scattered rangers and guide them towards safer positions. The return journey to the valley was made more difficult by her growing exhaustion and the deteriorating weather conditions. A new storm system was approaching from the west, threatening to bring more rain and possibly snow to the already devastated area. Maria knew that another severe weather event could be catastrophic for the exposed and injured rangers who were already struggling to survive. As she made her way back toward her observation post, Maria began developing a comprehensive plan for helping the trapped rangers survive until rescue arrived. She would use her elevated position and long-range communication capabilities to coordinate movement between groups, guide them toward better shelter, and help organize the sharing of supplies among units that were better equipped and those that were running dangerously low on resources. Captain Rodriguez had spent the day trying to consolidate his scattered command, but the challenging terrain made movement extremely dangerous. 2 rangers had been injured attempting to reach other groups, and he made the difficult decision to order everyone to remain in their current positions unless they faced immediate life-threatening danger. This decision likely saved lives, but it also meant that some groups would continue to face critical shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. Maria finally reached a position where she could see most of the trapped groups as afternoon turned to evening. What she observed filled her with both determination and dread. Several of the ranger groups appeared to be in worse condition than they had been that morning. The stress of the situation, combined with exposure to cold and dampness, was taking a serious toll on everyone in the valley. As the second night approached, Maria positioned herself where she could maintain visual contact with as many groups as possible while also being prepared to move quickly if emergency situations developed. She had become the unofficial coordinator of survival efforts for 163 trapped rangers, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders as darkness fell over the mountain valley once again. The approaching storm clouds promised another night of challenging weather, and Maria knew that the next several hours would be critical. Some of the injured rangers might not survive another night of exposure, and the psychological stress of being trapped was beginning to affect decision-making among even the most experienced soldiers. Everything would depend on how well she could coordinate their efforts and help them hold on until professional rescue teams could reach them. The second night brought with it a new wave of challenges that pushed both Maria and the trapped rangers to their absolute limits. The approaching storm system had indeed materialized, bringing not just rain but also sleet and the first hints of snow that would make survival even more precarious. From her exposed position on the ridge, Maria could feel the temperature dropping rapidly as wind-driven precipitation stung her face and made her scope difficult to use. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's group remained in the most immediate danger beneath the fractured cliff face. Throughout the night, Maria watched through her night vision scope as more chunks of rock broke away from the unstable formation above them. Each piece that fell sent her heart racing, knowing that a larger collapse could happen at any moment. She had managed to establish brief radio contact with Chun earlier and warned her about the danger, but the group had no safe way to move in the darkness and severe weather. Captain Rodriguez had made the difficult decision to organize a supply redistribution among the groups that could safely move short distances. Rangers with surplus food and water began carefully making their way to assist units that were running dangerously low. This operation was coordinated primarily through Maria's observations and radio guidance, as she was the only person with a clear view of the terrain and the positions of all groups. Sergeant Thompson volunteered to lead one of these dangerous supply runs. Despite his relative inexperience, the young Texan had demonstrated remarkable courage and leadership during the crisis. He and 2 volunteers from his squad carefully made their way across unstable terrain to reach a group of 12 rangers who had been trapped in a narrow ravine with limited supplies. The journey took them over 3 hours to cover less than a mile, but they successfully delivered food and medical supplies that likely saved lives. Private Elena Vesquez had established a makeshift medical station in one of the more stable sheltered areas and was coordinating treatment for the most seriously injured rangers. Her biggest challenge was dealing with hypothermia cases that were becoming more severe as the temperature continued to drop. Without proper heating or dry clothing, she was fighting a losing battle against the cold that was sapping the strength and will of even the healthiest rangers. Maria faced her own physical challenges as she maintained her vigil throughout the night. The combination of cold, fatigue, and stress was affecting her judgment and reflexes. She had not slept for more than 36 hours and had eaten very little during her constant movement and observation duties. However, she knew that any lapse in her attention could result in missing a critical emergency that might cost lives among the people depending on her guidance. Around midnight, Maria's worst fears were realized when she observed a medical emergency developing in one of the trapped groups. Through her scope, she could see that one of the rangers appeared to be having some kind of serious medical episode, possibly a heart attack or stroke brought on by the stress and cold. The group was signaling desperately for help, but they were in one of the most inaccessible locations in the entire valley. The ranger in medical distress was Staff Sergeant David Kim, a veteran with 15 years of service who had been dealing with high blood pressure that he had not disclosed on his medical forms. The combination of stress, cold, and physical exertion had triggered a cardiac event that was rapidly becoming life-threatening. His squad members had basic first aid training but nothing that could help them deal with this level of medical emergency. Maria made a split-second decision that would define the rest of the rescue operation. She abandoned her observation post and began making her way down into the valley toward Kim's location. The journey would be extremely dangerous in the dark and severe weather, but she was the only person who knew the exact location and had the necessary skills to navigate the treacherous terrain. Her sniper training had included extensive medical training for treating wounded soldiers in combat situations. The descent into the valley was a nightmare of loose rocks, icy surfaces, and zero visibility conditions. Maria relied entirely on her memory of the terrain and her compass navigation skills to make progress toward the trapped group. Several times she had to rope herself down cliff faces using improvised anchors, knowing that a single mistake could result in a fatal fall that would eliminate any hope of rescue for the 163 trapped rangers. It took Maria 4 hours to reach Sergeant Kim's location, during which time his condition had continued to deteriorate. She arrived to find him unconscious and barely breathing, with his squad members maintaining CPR rotation to keep him alive. Maria quickly assessed the situation and realized that Kim needed immediate evacuation to a medical facility, something that was impossible under current conditions. Drawing on her combat medical training, Maria administered emergency care that stabilized Kim's condition enough to keep him alive, but she knew that he needed advanced medical treatment within hours or he would likely die. This created a new urgency to the rescue situation. It was no longer just about survival until help arrived, but about getting critically injured people to medical facilities before it was too late. Captain Rodriguez had managed to establish better communication with several of his units and was coordinating his own rescue efforts when he received word about Kim's condition through Maria's radio reports. The news added pressure to an already desperate situation, as Rodriguez realized that they might lose people not just to exposure and injury, but to medical emergencies that could occur to anyone under the extreme stress they were all experiencing. Maria made the difficult decision to remain with Kim's group to provide ongoing medical care, but this meant abandoning her role as the overall coordinator of rescue efforts. She used her radio to brief Captain Rodriguez on the locations and conditions of all the groups she had been monitoring, essentially transferring command responsibility to him while she focused on keeping Kim alive. The third day dawned gray and cold, with snow now falling steadily across the mountain. The weather had moved beyond difficult to truly life-threatening, especially for the rangers who had been exposed for more than 48 hours. Maria had managed to keep Kim stable through the night, but his condition was still critical and she knew that time was running out. It was during the early morning hours of the third day that Maria heard the distant sound she had been hoping for: helicopters. The weather had cleared enough for aerial operations, and the rescue teams that had been mobilized based on her initial communication were finally able to approach the valley. However, the damaged terrain and continuing bad weather made helicopter landings impossible in most locations. The rescue helicopters faced the same challenges that had trapped the Rangers in the first place. Landing sites were either blocked by debris, too small for the large rescue aircraft, or located in areas where downdrafts from the rotor blades could trigger additional landslides. The helicopter crews were experienced in mountain rescues, but they had rarely encountered a situation where so many people were trapped in such a geographically diverse and dangerous area. Maria established radio contact with the lead rescue helicopter and began providing detailed information about each group's location and condition. Her 3 days of constant observation had given her intelligence that was invaluable to the rescue teams. She was able to guide them to the most critical cases first and provide information about safe approach routes and landing areas that would have taken the helicopter crews hours to identify on their own. The first successful rescue was Lieutenant Chen's group from beneath the unstable cliff face. Using a helicopter with a rescue hoist, the crew was able to extract all 8 Rangers from their precarious position just hours before a major rockfall occurred exactly where they had been sheltered. This rescue validated Maria's assessment of the dangers and probably saved 8 lives that would have been lost if the evacuation had been delayed. Sergeant Kim was among the second group to be evacuated, with Maria accompanying him to continue providing medical care during the helicopter flight to the nearest hospital. As she watched the mountain valley disappear below them, Maria felt a mixture of relief and continued worry for the Rangers who were still trapped below. Her part in the rescue operation was far from over, as she would need to help coordinate the evacuation of the remaining groups. The helicopter evacuation process proved to be complex and time-consuming. Each group had to be carefully assessed for the safest extraction method, and weather conditions continued to affect operations. Some groups could be picked up directly by helicopter, while others had to be moved to better locations first. The process required careful coordination between air and ground rescue teams, with Maria serving as the primary intelligence source for planning each operation. By the end of the third day, approximately half of the trapped Rangers had been successfully evacuated. However, the remaining groups included some of the most difficult cases: Rangers who were in locations that were either too dangerous for helicopter approach or who were too severely injured to be moved easily. These evacuations would require even more complex rescue operations that could extend into a 4th day. Captain Rodriguez was among the Rangers still waiting for evacuation, having insisted that his men be rescued before him. His leadership during the crisis had been instrumental in preventing panic and organizing survival efforts among the scattered groups. As he waited for his turn to be evacuated, he reflected on how Maria's actions had been the critical factor that had prevented what could have been a massive tragedy with potentially dozens of casualties. Maria found herself in the unique position of being both a victim who needed rescue and a key coordinator of the rescue operations. Her intimate knowledge of each group's location and condition made her invaluable to the rescue teams, but she was also exhausted and needed medical attention herself after 3 days of constant exposure to severe weather and extreme stress. As night fell on the third day, significant progress had been made, but the rescue operation was far from complete. Weather forecasts suggested that another storm system was approaching, which would halt helicopter operations and potentially trap the remaining Rangers for several more days. The race against time and weather continued, with Maria's coordination efforts becoming even more critical as conditions threatened to deteriorate once again. The 4th day of the rescue operation began with a race against time as weather forecasters confirmed that a major storm system would reach the mountain region by evening. This new storm promised to bring heavy snow and high winds that would make helicopter operations impossible for potentially several days. Maria found herself back in the valley, having returned with the rescue teams to help coordinate the evacuation of the remaining 67 Rangers who were still trapped in various locations. Captain Rodriguez had spent the night organizing the remaining groups into more concentrated areas where possible, following Maria's guidance about safe movement routes and stable shelter locations. His leadership during the crisis had been exemplary, but the strain of maintaining morale and discipline among exhausted and frightened rangers was taking its toll on him personally. He knew that many of his people were reaching their physical and psychological limits. Sergeant Thompson's squad was among the groups still awaiting evacuation, but the young sergeant had emerged as an unexpected leader during the crisis. His willingness to risk his own safety to help other groups had inspired many of the other rangers and had been instrumental in maintaining cooperation and mutual support among the scattered units. Thompson had grown from an inexperienced recruit into a leader who commanded respect from veterans twice his age. Private Elena Vesquez had established herself as the primary medical coordinator for the remaining groups, working closely with Maria and the rescue teams to prioritize evacuations based on medical need. Her careful assessment and treatment of injured rangers had undoubtedly saved lives, and she had managed to keep seriously injured people stable until they could receive proper medical care. Her supplies were completely exhausted, but her knowledge and skills continued to be invaluable. The most challenging remaining rescue involved a group of 15 rangers who were trapped in a narrow canyon where helicopter access was impossible due to dangerous downdrafts and limited maneuvering space. These rangers, led by Lieutenant Michael Torres, had been some of the most isolated throughout the crisis and were now facing severe supply shortages and several cases of advanced hypothermia. Maria worked with the rescue team leaders to develop a complex extraction plan for Torres's group that would involve ground-based rescue teams rappelling into the canyon while helicopters provided support and evacuation capabilities from the canyon rim. This operation would be extremely dangerous and would require precise timing and coordination to avoid triggering additional landslides in the unstable terrain. The canyon rescue operation began at first light with Maria positioned where she could observe both the trapped rangers and the rescue team's approach. Using her sniper scope and communication equipment, she provided real-time intelligence about conditions in the canyon and guided the rescue team's movements to avoid areas where loose rock posed immediate dangers. Technical Sergeant Amanda Foster, a veteran rescue specialist, led the team that rappelled into the canyon to reach Torres's group. Foster's experience in mountain rescue was extensive, but even she acknowledged that this was one of the most challenging operations she had ever attempted. The combination of unstable terrain, injured personnel, and weather pressure created conditions that pushed rescue techniques to their absolute limits. Maria's role evolved throughout the day as she became the primary communication link between the various rescue operations taking place simultaneously across the valley. Her unique position and comprehensive knowledge of the terrain made her an invaluable asset to multiple rescue teams working on different evacuations. She coordinated helicopter movements, guided ground teams to safe routes, and provided critical intelligence about changing conditions throughout the area. The canyon rescue proved to be even more complex than anticipated when the rescue team discovered that 2 of the trapped rangers were too severely injured to be moved using standard techniques. One had suffered a compound leg fracture during a fall, while another was showing signs of severe internal injuries. These cases required specialized medical equipment and techniques that pushed the limits of what was possible in field conditions. Maria found herself rappelling into the canyon alongside the rescue medics to provide additional medical support for the evacuation of the most critically injured rangers. Her combat medical training proved invaluable in stabilizing patients for the complex extraction process that involved raising them up the canyon walls using specialized rescue equipment while maintaining life support. As afternoon approached and the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the rescue operation intensified with helicopter crews pushing the limits of safe flying conditions to evacuate as many people as possible before weather forced them to suspend operations. The coordination between air and ground teams reached a level of precision that impressed even experienced rescue professionals. Captain Rodriguez was finally evacuated during the late afternoon, but only after ensuring that all of his subordinates had been safely extracted first. His dedication to his troops had been unwavering throughout the crisis, and his insistence on being the last to leave demonstrated the leadership qualities that had kept his scattered command functioning even under the most desperate circumstances. Sergeant Thompson's evacuation came as part of one of the final helicopter operations before the storm arrived. As he was lifted away from the valley that had been his home for 4 harrowing days, he looked down at the transformed landscape and reflected on how the experience had changed him fundamentally. The frightened young recruit who had entered the valley for a training exercise no longer existed. In his place was a seasoned ranger who had proven himself under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The last group to be evacuated included Maria herself, along with the rescue team members who had been working throughout the day to extract the most difficult cases. As their helicopter lifted off from the valley floor, the first snowflakes of the approaching storm were beginning to fall. The timing had been critical. Another few hours of delay would have trapped the rescue teams themselves and turned the operation from a successful rescue into an even larger disaster. Private Elena Vesquez was reunited with the rangers she had been treating when they all arrived at the regional medical center, where a full trauma team was waiting to provide advanced care for the injured. Her quick thinking and skilled medical care had been credited with preventing what could have been multiple fatalities from treatable injuries and medical conditions that had been complicated by the extreme conditions and delayed evacuation. The final count showed that all 163 rangers had been successfully evacuated from the valley, though 17 required hospitalization for various injuries and medical conditions. Most remarkably, there had been no fatalities despite the severity of the situation and the multiple life-threatening emergencies that had developed during the 4-day ordeal. Staff Sergeant David Kim, whose cardiac episode had created one of the most critical moments of the crisis, made a full recovery after emergency heart surgery and would later credit Maria's immediate medical intervention with saving his life. His experience led to changes in military medical screening procedures to prevent similar situations in the future. The investigation into the training exercise disaster revealed that the weather emergency had been caused by an unprecedented confluence of meteorological factors that had not been predicted by standard forecasting models. The rapid development of severe weather conditions and the cascading landslides that followed were determined to be a natural disaster that could not have been reasonably anticipated or prevented. Maria's actions during the crisis earned her numerous commendations and awards, including the Soldier's Medal for Heroism and the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during her rescue efforts. However, she consistently deflected personal credit, emphasizing instead the teamwork and mutual support that had enabled the survival of all 163 trapped rangers. The psychological impact of the experience affected all participants in different ways. Many of the rangers developed deeper appreciation for the importance of teamwork and leadership under pressure. Others struggled with symptoms of post-traumatic stress related to their feelings of helplessness during the crisis. The military provided extensive counseling and support services to help all participants process their experiences. Sergeant Thompson received a battlefield promotion to staff sergeant in recognition of his leadership during the crisis. His actions had demonstrated that courage and effectiveness in emergency situations were not necessarily related to experience or rank, but to character and determination to help others regardless of personal risk. Captain Rodriguez was later assigned to help develop new training protocols and emergency procedures based on lessons learned from the crisis. His leadership during the disaster was studied as an example of how to maintain command effectiveness even when normal communication and coordination systems fail completely. The mountain valley where the exercise had taken place was permanently closed to training activities due to the unstable geological conditions created by the landslides. The area became a case study for emergency management professionals and was used to develop new techniques for coordinating complex rescue operations in challenging terrain. Maria returned to duty after recovering from her physical injuries, but she carried with her a changed perspective on the meaning of service and sacrifice. The experience had shown her that true heroism often consisted not of single dramatic actions, but of sustained commitment to helping others even when the personal cost was high. Years later, the rescued rangers would gather annually to commemorate their shared experience and to honor the courage and dedication that had made their survival possible. These reunions served as reminders of how ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when faced with life or death situations that demanded the very best of their character and abilities. The story of Maria Santos and the 163 trapped rangers became a legend within military and rescue communities, serving as an inspiration for training programs and emergency preparedness initiatives. More importantly, it demonstrated that even in the most desperate situations, human courage, ingenuity, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible challenges and bring everyone home safely. The bonds forged during those 4 days in the mountains lasted lifetimes, creating a brotherhood and sisterhood of shared experience that transcended rank, background, and individual differences. They had faced nature at its most dangerous and had emerged not just as survivors, but as proof that the human spirit could triumph over the most formidable obstacles when people worked together toward a common goal of ensuring that no one was left behind.